shaking her hand. They are part of the welcoming committee at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. The motorcade arrived a short time ago. There is a group of about 20 friends and family members greeting this plane. You see Paul Whelan looking into the eyes of Vice President Kamala Harris, talking about this landing. As you know, this is completing the historic multinational prisoner exchange between the U.S., Russia, and 4 other countries. You see Paul Whelan hugging the president and now the vice president. That plane, which you see there on the tarmac, carrying Paul Whelan, as well as journalist Evan Gershkovich, who works for the Wall Street Journal. Paul Whelan now hugging family members. You hear a buzz cheering. There's the Wall Street Journal reporter. That's Paul Whelan's sister greeting him on the tarmac. We just saw Evan Gershkovich hug Kamala Harris, shaking the president's hand, giving him an embrace as well. He was in prison for 491 days. And I want to go now to Jay O'Brien, who's there on the tarmac. Jay, paint a picture for us of this emotional homecoming. Clearly, there are friends, relatives, and colleagues at the Wall Street Journal there to greet Evan. Jay?
Juju, a silence fell over the press and the others here as you saw that plane coming in. It was the only plane in the sky. It was the only light in the sky. And then as Paul Whelan stepped off the aircraft, it was only fitting. He is the one of these 3 detainees who had been imprisoned in Russia the longest. He stepped off the aircraft just behind me, and this moment is still playing out. He hugged President Biden, he hugged Vice President Harris, and then he went to his sister. This cheer that just erupted, you might be able to hear it, Juju, that is from, oh, he's picking her up. That is Evan Gershkovich picking up what I believe to be his sister, or no, his mother Ella. His mother Ella, the Wall Street Journal has put out a long piece that details everything that she went through, specifically his father as well. She was buttonholing diplomats at dinners by herself. She was a one-woman negotiating machine. She went to Russia with his father. She met, the Wall Street Journal reports, with his interrogators in Russia. She fought tirelessly to bring her son home, and the image you just saw was him pick her up in joy.
It's quite emotional, Jay. What we're now seeing is President Biden greeting the Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva. She has just descended from the stairs, is now talking to the Vice President, Kamala Harris, presumably talking about this long journey to freedom. They are being met by family members, encouraged to do so as she runs across to greet her family. It's an emotional scene on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews. Jay, I know that you started talking about the diplomatic efforts, but also the quiet efforts and the not-so-quiet efforts of family members to keep their loved ones in the news and to keep their imprisonment a priority for this administration.
And the strength it took to do that and endure what these families have gone through. Just very quickly, Juju, you see still Alsu Kurmasheva hugging her family, her daughter there in the gray shirt. Her daughter turns 13 years old tomorrow. Her daughter, Miriam, she was the one that President Biden sang happy birthday to at that event earlier today. An emotionally fraught experience for them. You see Elizabeth Whelan on the tarmac behind me as well. She is Paul Whelan's sister. President Biden joked earlier, to your point about families demonstrating strength, that she practically lived in the Oval Office for the past few years, the near 6 years that Paul Whelan has been imprisoned, trying to advocate for her brother's release. I talked to a source close to these negotiations who said that Elizabeth Whelan was a pit bull, constantly holding this administration and other administrations to account, advocating for her brother, and doing it all while undergoing the tumult of her brother not being here.
And you can see her laughing out loud, smiles all around. Paul Whelan now talking again to the vice president, shaking her hand. I want to bring in Selena Wang, who is at the White House. And Selena, I just want to, as we're seeing these pictures of an emotional reunion, it looks as though the president is speaking. Let's see if we can listen in.
invited to her home.
You said earlier that all these negotiations require tough calls. What was the toughest call in this one?
The toughest call on this one for other countries, because I asked them to do some things that were against their immediate self-interest, and really very difficult for them to do, particularly Germany and Slovenia. Slovenia came in at the last minute, and I tell you what, the Chancellor was incredible. He was incredible.
So what's your message to other countries that may think that taking Americans into their custody, unlawfully detaining them, would be a good way to get something that they want from us?
Hey, look, that's been the case for all of history. My job is to make sure that, number one, they don't get them. And if they do, we get them back. I don't buy this idea that you're gonna let these people rot in jail because other people may be captured. We will set out all the notifications to all the other countries, all our citizens, what countries not to go to, what to do, what not to do, and they got to pay attention. I got more work to do. So.
This is an extraordinary day, and I'm very thankful for our president and what he has done over his entire career, but in particular as it relates to these families and these individuals, what he has been able to do to bring the allies together on many issues, but in particular this one. This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day. You can see it in the families, in their eyes, and in their cries.
When did you know you got the deal done?
A while ago. We got to make sure, we wanted to make sure everything was in place. And Slovenia made the right move at the right time. So anyway, look, it's time to trust. I mean it. I know everybody thinks I talk about the notion of relationships with foreign policy with other countries. Much of it, and you've heard me kid with Barack, kid me, all politics is personal. It matters. Other leaders trust you, you trust them, you get things done. And that's how this got done. A lot of help. Anyway, thank you.
How worried are you?
An impromptu press conference with Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris receiving the former prisoners rather, from Russia. Kamala Harris calling it an extraordinary day and thanking the president for his diplomacy. Joe Biden calling it a matter of trust, saying he is delighted that they're home. I want to bring in Selena Wang, who's at the White House. Selena, take us behind the scenes to this very complicated set of negotiations that took place for months, if not years.
Juju, just watching President Biden and Vice President Harris speak there, I'm just struck by the relief and the joy that they feel, because behind the scenes, this has been years of painstaking negotiations and diplomacy to achieve the largest and most complex prisoner swap since the Cold War. President Biden himself has been intimately involved in these negotiations, and you heard him there praising the Prime Minister of Slovenia. In fact, the very day that President Biden announced he was going to drop out of this presidential race on July 21st, when he was still in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, recovering from COVID, he was actually on the phone with the Prime Minister of Slovenia trying to secure this deal. And so for this moment, this is going to be a critical part of President Biden's legacy as well as Vice President Harris's legacy, both of them praising their allies, because this was such a difficult thing, not only for the U.S. to execute, but for all of these other countries to do together.
Selena, I don't want to interrupt you, but there's Evan walking over to a crowd of people, presumably friends, colleagues from the Wall Street Journal. I want to bring in Jay O'Brien again. Jay, give us a sense of what you're hearing and seeing and what you know to be those visitors who are giving him bear hugs now.
Yeah, Juju. So this is about a dozen or so reporters from the Wall Street Journal, some of whom senior executives, some of whom friends and colleagues of Evan Gershkovich, who came here. We heard from Wall Street Journal reporters who said some of them were here to cover this event, just like any other news event. They are reporters, just like Evan is, and then some just came here to greet their friend. And we hear Evan Gershkovich speaking to that gaggle of reporters down there as well. Another thing to note, as we talk about some of the color here at Joint Base Andrews as this plane is landed, earlier before he walked over there, Evan Gershkovich was standing with Paul Whelan, and their families were talking. Two families who, unlike most other families in this country, understand what each other went through. And then there's one more thing to know here that just underscores how emotional this is. So we talked about Miriam, who is Alsu Kurmasheva's youngest daughter. Her 13th birthday is tomorrow. I'm looking at her now. You may not be able to see her in the camera shot. She has not let her mother go since she stepped off that aircraft, Juju.
That's a beautiful note. Thanks for sharing that with us. Selena, I want to bring you back in on this. The president mentioned his allies and how they had to make the toughest call, specifically Slovenia, but also Germany, because they were holding prisoners, including a hitman who had been convicted of murder.
Yeah, Germany was absolutely critical here because key to making the swap happen was Russia insisting that someone be released. Was Vadim Krasikov. He is a convicted murderer, but he was being held in Germany. President Biden had to personally plea the chancellor of Germany to make this swap happen. This, for the president, underscores the importance of American leadership, of American diplomacy, and American allies. Earlier today, he took a veiled swipe at Donald Trump, saying allies are critical and key.
Another theme that Kamala Harris doubled down on here in Maryland on the tarmac. I want to bring in Patrick Reevell, who